5 in the morning was the only time the world made sense. I pressed the heels of my hands into the cold dough, feeling the resistance, then the yield. Flour dusted the stainless steel counter like fresh snow, and the air smelled of yeast and expensive vanilla. Here inside the four walls of Sweet Beth's bakery, everything had a recipe. If you measured the butter to the gram and let the dough rest for exactly 40 minutes, you got a perfect croissant. There were no surprises, no lies, no sudden changes in the terms of agreement. Outside the front window, Portland was still asleep under a blanket of gray drizzle. My Toyota Camry, 15 years old and starting to rust near the wheel wells, sat alone in the parking lot. I could have bought a new car 3 years ago. The bakery supplied pastries to 12 of the city's best hotels, and my bank account was healthier than it had ever been. But every time I looked at a new lease or a shiny brochure, a familiar panic tightened my chest. I needed that safety net. I needed to know that if the floor dropped out from under me again, I could survive. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the small office in the back. It was barely a closet, just enough room for a desk and a high shelf. My eyes drifted up to the shoebox sitting on the top tier. It was an old Nike box, the cardboard fading at the corners, covered in a thin layer of dust. I hadn't opened it in months, but I knew exactly what was inside. 120 bank transfer receipts, organized by month, rubber-banded by year, $336,000. That was the price I had paid for a promise. I turned away from the box, my stomach doing that slow, heavy roll it always did when I thought about the money. I walked back out to the main floor to check the proofing racks. On the wall near the entrance hung a framed photograph from 10 years ago. My parents, Roy and Denise, stood in the center beaming. My brother Kyle was right next to them, his arm draped casually over Dad's shoulder, looking like the prince of the family in his rented tuxedo. And there I was, standing on the far right edge. If you framed the photo just a little differently, you could crop me out entirely and the composition would actually look better. I looked like a stranger who had accidentally wandered into the frame and was waiting for someone to ask her to leave. My phone buzzed against the metal counter. The sound was jarring in the quiet kitchen. I looked at the screen. 5:47 in the morning. Mom. Denise Hartman never called before 9 unless someone was dead or Kyle was in trouble. My pulse kicked up a notch, not out of fear, but out of a weary, heavy dread. I let it buzz 3 times before I wiped the flour off my thumb and answered. "Beth," she said. "No hello? No good morning." Her voice was tight-pitched high with that specific tone she reserved for crises that required my checkbook. "We need to talk. It is about your brother." I leaned against the prep table, closing my eyes. "Is he okay?" "He is going through a terrible time," she said, and I could hear the tears she was holding back. "The business climate has been so hard, Beth. You know how much he has struggled to get this startup off the ground. Kyle had been launching startups for 20 years. What happened, Mom?" "He lost the house." The silence in the bakery stretched out thick and suffocating. I stared at the convection oven, watching the digital timer count down. The house on Maple Street, the house Dad had put the down payment on, and I had paid the mortgage for every single month for a decade. "Lost it?" I asked, my voice flat. "What do you mean, lost it?" "The bank took it," she whispered. "Foreclosure, 6 months ago." 6 months. They had known for 6 months. I gripped the edge of the stainless steel table so hard my knuckles turned white. All those receipts in the Nike box. All those checks I wrote while driving a car with a broken heater, while living in a studio apartment the size of a postage stamp so Kyle could have a 3-bedroom home to build his business in. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because he needs us, Beth." Mom's voice shifted, gaining strength. "He is family. He is devastated. Your father and I are calling a family meeting this Saturday. Everyone is coming. Aunt Helen, Uncle Frank. We need to rally around him. A family meeting." I knew exactly what that meant. It wasn't a discussion. It was an ambush. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I paid $300,000 for that house. Dad promised me that when Kyle got on his feet, the deed would transfer to me." "Oh, stop living in the past," Denise snapped, the sadness vanishing instantly. "That money is gone, Beth. We have to look forward. Kyle is your brother. He is flesh and blood. And honestly, we were thinking about your situation. My situation? You have that lovely house in Lake Oswego now, she said. Her tone was casual, terrifyingly casual. It is a big place for one person. Do you not think? It has, 4 bedrooms. And Kyle has nowhere to go. The air in the kitchen seemed to drop 20 degrees. I looked around my bakery. My name was on the lease. My name was on the deed to my current house. I had built this from nothing, scraping together every cent, working 18-hour days, while Kyle played CEO in a house I paid for. So that is what this is, I said quietly. You want my house. We want you to do the right thing, she said. Come to the meeting on Saturday, 2 o'clock. Do not be late. And Beth, try to have an open heart. Family is everything. The line went dead. I stood there for a long time holding the silent phone. The smell of baking bread, usually my greatest comfort, suddenly made me feel nauseous. I looked at the family photo on the wall again. The way I stood on the edge. The way they leaned toward Kyle. They didn't just want help. They wanted to strip me for parts to keep their golden engine running. The back door chimed, making me jump. Jenna walked in, shaking a wet umbrella. She was dressed in her power suit, sharp gray wool that cost more than my first car, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. Jenna had been my best friend since college and the best family law attorney in Portland for the last 12 years. She took one look at my face and stopped. Who died? She asked, dropping her briefcase on a chair. Kyle lost the house, I said. The one I paid for. Jenna froze. Her eyes narrowed, turning from friend to shark in a split second. The one with the 300 grand of your equity gone. Gambling, probably. Or bad investments. Mom just called. They are holding a family meeting on Saturday to discuss my obligations. She let out a short, sharp laugh that had no humor in it. Obligations? Let me guess. They want you to house him. They mentioned my new place, said it was too big for one person. Jenna walked around the counter and poured herself a coffee, her movements precise and angry. Beth listened to me very carefully. You do not have a legal obligation to give that man a single crumb of a croissant, let alone a house. I know, I said, but you know them. If I do not go, I am the villain. They will spin this to the whole extended family. I will be the greedy sister who turned her back on her suffering brother. So go, Jenna said, taking a sip, but do not go as a daughter. Go as a creditor. She leaned against the counter, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on the office door. You still have that box, the one with the receipts? Top shelf, I said. And the recording, the one from 10 years ago. I nodded. I had never told anyone but Jenna about that. The day Dad asked me to take over the mortgage payments, I had been sitting in my car looking at a bookkeeping textbook. I recorded everything back then to practice transcription. I had Dad on tape clear as day saying the words, "You pay the mortgage and the equity is yours. It is just a temporary arrangement for Kyle." Get it all ready, Jenna said. Because a family meeting is not a negotiation, Beth. It is a public shaming. They are going to put you in a chair in the middle of the room, surround you with relatives who only know Kyle's version of the story, and pressure you until you break. It is an intervention, but instead of trying to get someone off drugs, they are trying to get you hooked back onto their dysfunction. I looked at the dough on the table. It was overproofed now, ruined. I picked it up and dropped it into the trash bin with a heavy thud. I am going, I said. But I need to know what I'm walking into. Kyle did not just lose a house overnight. You do not lose that kind of asset without leaving a trail. Jenna pulled her phone out. You have 4 days. I can run a background check, pull public records. We can see exactly what your brother has been up to. Do it, I said. Jenna typed something, then paused. You know if you go into that room alone, they will eat you alive. They have had 40 years of practice pressing your buttons. They installed the buttons, Beth. I know. Then do not play their game, she said. If they want a meeting, give them a meeting. But change the dynamic. Find out who else he has hurt. Because a guy like Kyle, he never screws over just one person. I wiped the last of the flour from the counter. My hands were steady now. The panic was gone, replaced by something cold and hard like a stone settling in my gut. I will find out, I said. I will find out everything. That evening, my apartment felt too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. I poured a glass of Pinot Noir Oregon Red, dark and earthy, and sat at my kitchen island with my laptop open. The blue light from the screen washed out the warmth of the room as I typed my brother's name into the search bar. Kyle Hartman. His public Facebook profile was a shrine to a man who did not exist. There were photos of him shaking hands with local city council members, posts about the grind of entrepreneurship, and inspirational quotes about resilience overlaid on stock photos of mountains. He looked successful. He looked like the man my parents thought he was. But the internet never forgets, and it never truly keeps a secret. I spent an hour scrolling through his friend list looking for cracks in the facade. It was a digital ghost town of superficial connections until I clicked on a photo from a bar in Seattle tagged by a guy named Steve, whom I vaguely remembered from Kyle's high school days. In the background of the grainy shot, Kyle was laughing his arm around a woman with long dark hair. The tag on Kyle's face did not link to his main profile. It linked to a profile named Kyle Morrison. My breath hitched. I clicked the name. Kyle Morrison lived in Portland but spent a lot of time in Seattle. Kyle Morrison listed his job as venture capital consultant, and Kyle Morrison was very, very single according to his relationship status. I scrolled down the timeline of this stranger wearing my brother's face. It was curated differently, less business, more lifestyle. Photos of expensive dinners, view of the Sound from a high-rise balcony, and then a picture from 8 months ago. It was taken at a resort in Cabo. The sun was setting, turning the ocean into liquid gold. Kyle was holding a woman, the same dark-haired woman from the bar photo, and they were looking at each other with a terrifying intensity. The caption read, "Best anniversary ever." Anniversary. I took a sip of wine, the liquid turning sour in my mouth. Kyle had told us he was at a meditation retreat in Northern California that week to clear his head after a failed merger. I clicked on the woman's tag. Megan Porter. Her profile was open. She looked young, maybe late 20s. Her cover photo was a classroom full of colorful art projects, and her bio said second-grade teacher. I scrolled past photos of her dog, her hiking trips, her coffee dates until I hit a post from 2 months ago. It was a black and white ultrasound image. The caption was short. "Can't wait to meet you, little one." There was a heart emoji. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I scanned the comments. Congratulations from friends, questions about the due date heart emojis from her mother. But there was no comment from Kyle Morrison. No like, no acknowledgement. I looked at the date of the post, 2 months ago. Just around the time Kyle had stopped answering Mom's calls for a few weeks because he was overwhelmed with work. I sat back, the wine glass cold in my hand. He had an entire other life. A girlfriend of at least a year. A baby on the way. And judging by the silence on her page recently, he had already begun his exit strategy. My phone sat on the counter, silent and heavy. I looked at the young woman's face in her profile picture. She had a kind smile, the sort that hadn't yet been hardened by a man like my brother. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. Not for me. For her. The next morning, the bakery was a whirlwind of steam and sugar. We were packing 200 croissants for the downtown Hyatt, and the air was thick with the smell of butter and urgency. I was sealing a box when the mail carrier dropped a stack of envelopes on the counter. One of them stood out. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with a texture like linen. The return address was embossed in gold foil. My parents' address. I wiped my hands on a towel and tore it open. Inside was a formal invitation, the kind you buy for weddings or galas. The Hartman family meeting. Date Saturday, January 24th. Time 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Location 1847 Oakwood Drive, Lake Oswego. RSVP required. At the bottom, centered in italicized script, was a quote, "Family is not an important thing. It is everything." Michael J. Fox. I let out a dry, humorless laugh that turned heads in the kitchen. Family is everything. The irony was sharp enough to cut skin. They spent money on professional invitations for an intervention designed to extort me. I flipped the card over. On the back, in my mother's cramped, looping handwriting, was a note. Beth. I hope you come with an open heart. This is a chance for healing. We need to be united. And then a postscript. P.S. You can bring a +1 if you would like. I know it can be hard to attend these things alone. My fingers tightened on the cardstock, bending the corner. A +1. It was a throwaway line, a passive-aggressive nod to my single status. She assumed I would come alone. She assumed I would sit there outnumbered and outgunned while they picked my pockets. Unless. My mind flashed back to the ultrasound photo, to Megan Porter in Seattle. Unless someone else wanted to see the show. I shoved the invitation into my apron pocket and walked back to the office. I didn't care about the croissants anymore. I pulled up LinkedIn on my phone and typed in Megan Porter, Seattle. There she was, second-grade teacher at Hilltop Elementary. I stared at the contact button. Calling Jenna would have been the smart move. Jenna would tell me to be careful, to think about liability, to consider the emotional fallout. But Jenna wasn't looking at the face of a woman who was carrying a Hartman baby while my brother played the victim in a rented tuxedo. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me, the kind that comes right before you jump off a high dive. I wasn't doing this to be cruel. If Kyle had scammed her, if he had left her alone with a child on the way, she deserved to know who the father really was. She deserved to know he wasn't Kyle Morrison, the venture capitalist. He was Kyle Hartman, the man who lost his sister's house on a pair of pocket aces. I found her work email address. I composed the message slowly, my thumbs hovering over the glass screen. Subject regarding Kyle Morrison. Dear Megan, my name is Beth Hartman. I believe you know my brother, though you may know him as Kyle Morrison. I have some information regarding him that I think you need to hear. It is urgent. Please contact me. I added my phone number and hit send before I could talk myself out of it. 2 days passed. The bakery kept moving dough, rising ovens, firing customers, paying, but I was moving through it like a ghost. Every time my phone vibrated, my stomach dropped. It was Thursday afternoon when the call came. I was in the office reconciling the weekly invoices. The number on the screen had a Seattle area code. I closed the door and locked it. The hum of the commercial mixer outside faded to a dull thrum. Hello, I answered. Is this Beth? The voice on the other end was brittle, sounding like it might shatter if I breathed too hard. Yes, this is Beth. Is this Megan? There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of shaky breathing. You said you know Kyle Morrison. I know Kyle Hartman, I said gently. He uses the name Morrison sometimes. Does he have a scar above his left eyebrow? From a bicycle accident when he was 12, I heard a sharp intake of breath. Yes. He told me he said it was from the car accident, the one that killed his parents. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of my desk. He told you his parents are dead? Yes. Megan, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. My parents are very much alive. They live in Lake Oswego. Kyle is their son, and I am his sister. On the other end of the line, Megan let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. I knew that sound. It was the sound of reality colliding with a carefully constructed dream. He has been gone for 4 months, she whispered. He said he was going to Portland to liquidate some assets for our new house in Seattle. He said he wanted to be debt-free before the baby came. The baby. Megan, I asked, dread coiling in my gut. Did you give him money? Silence. Then a small broken yes. How much? $85,000, she said. It was everything. It was the settlement money from when my own parents passed away 3 years ago. It was for the house. He said he would put it in a high-yield account until we closed on the property. $85,000. My inheritance money. Her inheritance money. Kyle didn't just steal, he scavenged. He found women with holes in their hearts and filled them with lies until he could empty their bank accounts. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my ear. I am so sorry, Megan. I am so sorry. He isn't coming back, is he? She asked. Her voice was stronger now, hardening around the edges. No, I said. He isn't. But I know where he will be this Saturday. I waited a beat. My family is holding a meeting, I told her. They are trying to get me to give him more money. They think he is a victim of a bad economy. They do not know about you. They do not know about the baby. I took a breath. My mother told me I could bring a +1. The silence on the line stretched for 10 seconds. I could hear the background noise of a coffee shop or a school hallway, the mundane world continuing on while 2 women stood in the wreckage of my brother's making. You want me to come? Megan asked. I want you to have the chance to look him in the eye, I said. I want you to have the chance to ask him for your money back in front of the parents he said were dead. I don't know if I can, she said. I am 7 months pregnant. I feel stupid. You are not stupid, I said firmly. You were targeted by a professional. And you are not alone. I will pick you up. I will drive you there. I will walk in with you. Another pause. Then I heard a shift in her tone. The sadness was still there, but something else had joined it. Anger. The kind of anger that burns clean and hot. He hasn't answered a single text, she said. He blocked my number. He blocked my email. He just erased me. He can't erase you if you are standing in his living room, I said. Saturday, she said. 2 o'clock, I confirmed. I will be there. I hung up the phone. My hand was trembling, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear. I looked at the shoebox on the shelf. I looked at the invitation on my desk. Family is everything. I picked up a pen and wrote 2 words on the RSVP card next to the number attending line. 2. The drive north to Vancouver, Washington was a gray blur of rain and brake lights along Interstate 5. The wipers slapped a steady hypnotic rhythm against the glass, counting down the miles between my solitary life and the wreckage my brother had left in his wake. Vancouver sat right on the border, a neutral ground between my home in Portland and Megan's in Seattle, separated only by the wide steel-gray Columbia River. I pulled into the parking lot of the coffee shop we had agreed on. It was a converted industrial space with exposed brick and too many hanging plants, the kind of place where people brought laptops to write screenplays they would never finish. I saw her the moment I walked in. She was sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, like it was the only warm thing in the world. She looked younger than her photos. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, escaping in wisps around a face that was pale and devoid of makeup. But it was the silhouette that stopped me cold. Under her oversized gray sweater, the curve of her belly was undeniable. 7 months, a whole life growing inside her. I ordered a black coffee to give my hands something to do, then walked over. Megan. She looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, the skin beneath them bruised with exhaustion. She didn't smile. She just nodded and gestured to the empty chair. I am Beth. I know, she said softly. You have his nose. I sat down, feeling a sudden, violent urge to apologize for my own genetics. Up close, the reality of her situation hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a story on a screen anymore. This was a woman who had bought a crib, painted a nursery, and picked out names, all while my brother was likely throwing dice at a table in Las Vegas. I did not know if you would actually come, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I told you I would. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out her phone. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she were handling a loaded weapon. She unlocked it and slid it across the scratched wooden table toward me. Read them, she whispered. Please. I need someone else to see them. I need to know I am not crazy. I picked up the device. The message thread was named Kyle, my love. I scrolled back. It went on for 2 years. Hundreds of messages. February 14th. Happy Valentine's, beautiful. I'm closing a deal in San Francisco, but my heart is in Seattle with you. August 3rd. Just put the deposit down on the venue. A spring wedding sounds perfect. November 10th. I transferred the funds for the investment. We are going to build an empire, babe. Just you and me. I checked the date on that last one. November 10th. That was the week Mom had told me Kyle was in the hospital with a severe case of pneumonia and needed help with his medical bills. I had sent him $2,000. He had been in Seattle taking Megan's money, not spending it. He told me he was an orphan, Megan said, her voice gaining a sharp edge. He said his parents died in a house fire when he was 20. He said he had no siblings. He cried when he told me. I looked up from the phone. A house fire. He said that is why he couldn't handle the holidays, why he always had to travel for work during Christmas. He said it was too painful to be around families. My stomach turned. Kyle spent every Christmas at Mom and Dad's house in Lake Oswego eating prime rib and complaining that his gifts weren't expensive enough. I handed the phone back to her. It felt heavy, radiated with the heat of 1,000 lies. He has parents, Megan. And he has a sister. We have had dinner together every Christmas for the last 40 years. She closed her eyes, and a single tear tracked through the powder on her cheek. Then she opened her banking app. Here she said, pointing to a series of transfers. August 15th, $30,000. September 1st, $25,000. October 12th, $30,000. $85,000. That was the week he went to Vegas for a networking conference, I murmured. She stared at me. Vegas. He posted photos of the Bellagio fountains. I said. He told us he was meeting investors. Megan let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. My parents' life insurance. My savings from teaching summer school for 8 years. He said we were buying a foreclosure in Queen Anne. He said he needed cash to secure the bid before it went to market. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was an ultrasound image, the black and white swirl of a developing spine and a tiny head. I sent him this, she said, 5 months ago. Look at the reply. I looked at the screenshot she had printed out. Kyle, our little miracle. I can't wait to be a dad. I'm going to be the father I never had. He ghosted me 4 weeks later, she said. Phone disconnected. Email bounced. I drove to the address he gave me in Portland. It was a UPS store. We sat in silence for a long time, the rain drumming against the metal roof of the coffee shop. I looked at the young woman across from me, stripped of her money, her dignity, and her trust, carrying the child of a man who viewed people as resources to be mined. You have 3 options, I said, finally. You can go to the police, you can sue him, or you can do nothing and try to move on. I already went to the police in Seattle, she said, wiping her face. They said it is a civil matter. Since I gave him the money willingly, it is not theft. It is a bad investment between partners. Unless I can prove fraud, they won't touch it. Then we prove fraud, I said. But first we have to survive Saturday. Megan shrank back into her sweater. I cannot go there, Beth. I cannot walk into a room full of strangers and tell them I was stupid enough to give a man I wasn't married to $85,000. They will not think you are stupid, I said, though I wasn't sure if that was true. My mother had an impressive capacity for victim blaming, but they need to see you. Why, she asked. Because they are going to corner me, I said. They are going to use guilt, obligation, and family duty to strip me of everything I have worked for. If I go in there alone, it is just my word against his needs, and they always choose his needs. I leaned forward. But if you walk in there, if they see you, if they see that baby, it forces them to look at the truth. It takes away his mask. Megan looked down at her hands. They were trembling. What if he denies it? What if he says, I am crazy? Then you show them the phone, I said. You show them the photos. You play the voicemails. She took a deep breath, her hand resting protectively over her belly. I want him to know, she said, her voice quiet but fierce. I want him to know he didn't break me. Then help me, I said. Come with me. She looked out the window at the gray sky, then back at me. Okay, but I need a lawyer. After this is over, you help me find a lawyer who will bury him. I have just the person I promised. The bell above the bakery door jingled the next morning, a cheerful sound that made my nerves jump. It was 10 o'clock, the morning rush had settled, and the air smelled of cooling cinnamon and strong espresso. I looked up from the register to see Aunt Helen breezing through the door. Helen was Dad's younger sister, a woman who wore floral scarves and carried an air of perpetual anxious peacemaking. She was holding a potted orchid wrapped in pink foil and a box of chocolates from the expensive place downtown. Bethany, she chirped, navigating around a display of sourdough. I was just in the neighborhood and thought I would pop in. Helen had not popped into my bakery in 5 years. She lived 40 minutes away in Beaverton. Hi, Aunt Helen, I said, coming around the counter. I wiped my hands on my apron, eyeing the gifts. For you, she said, thrusting the orchid into my hands. You look tired, honey. Are you working too hard? You know what they say, all work and no play. She looked around the shop, her eyes darting to the customers, checking to see if anyone was listening. I am fine, Helen. What brings you here? Oh, just family business, she said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Your mother told me you are coming on Saturday. I was so relieved. Were you? Of course. She patted my arm. "We are all so worried about Kyle. And honestly, worried about the tension in the family. It is not good for your parents, you know. Your dad's blood pressure is up." I placed the orchid on the counter next to the register. "And let me guess. You think the best way to lower his blood pressure is for me to hand over my house?" Helen's smile faltered, but only for a second. "Now, Beth, nobody is saying hand over. We are talking about helping. Kyle is your brother. He has just had a run of terrible luck." "Luck," I repeated. "Is that what we are calling it?" She sighed a long, dramatic exhale. "Look, I know you feel like you have done your share. But you are the one with the steady ground beneath your feet. You have this place. You have your home. Kyle is drowning. When someone is drowning, you do not ask how they fell in. You throw them a rope." That sounded rehearsed. It sounded like something Mom had said to her on the phone an hour ago. I looked at Helen. I really looked at her. I saw the tightness around her eyes, the way her fingers were picking at the hem of her scarf. "Aunt Helen," I said slowly, "I am going to be there on Saturday, and I am going to tell the truth about what Kyle has done. Not just the house he lost. Everything." Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. The warm, fuzzy aunt persona slipped. The truth she asked sharply. "What good does digging up the past do?" "We need solutions, Beth. Not accusations. Sometimes keeping the peace is more important than being right." "Is it?" I asked. "Even if the peace is a lie?" She stiffened. "You are being difficult, just like you were when you were a teenager, always keeping score." She turned and walked out, leaving the orchid sitting on the counter like a bribe that hadn't been accepted. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Jenna. "Incoming. Just pulled the public records on your aunt." I unlocked the phone. Attached was a screenshot of a court filing from 3 years ago, case number 49201-B, civil judgment. Defendant Kyle Hartman, cosigner Helen Hartman, amount $50,000, defaulted. I stared at the screen. Helen hadn't come here to make peace. She had come to ensure the cash cow was ready for milking. She had co-signed a loan for Kyle and he had defaulted. If I didn't bail him out, the creditors were coming for her next. She wasn't an ally. She was a hostage. See? The night before the meeting, my apartment felt less like a home and more like a war room. I sat on the floor of my living room surrounded by the physical evidence of my brother's life. To my left, the Nike shoebox open now. 120 receipts sorted into 12 neat stacks, rubber banded by year. $336,000 in verified bank transfers. To my right, the printer hummed, spitting out the screenshots Megan had sent me. The texts, the promises, the lies about dead parents, the bank statements showing the $85,000 drain, and in the center a small USB drive containing the audio file from 10 years ago. I picked up the ultrasound picture. It was a copy. Megan kept the original, but the image was clear. A tiny ghostly curl of life. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. 38 years old. I saw the fine lines starting around my eyes, the set of my jaw that had become harder over the years. For decades I had played the role they wrote for me. The responsible one. The safety net. The one who stood on the edge of the photo and fixed things so the star could shine. I had thought that if I just paid enough, forgave enough, and stayed quiet enough, they would eventually love me the way they loved him. I realized now with a clarity that was both cold and liberating that you cannot buy what isn't for sale. I wasn't going to Lake Oswego to win them over. I was going to burn the script. My phone lit up on the floor. A text from Mom. "Reminder, 2:00 p.m. tomorrow. Please do not be late. We are counting on you." I picked up the phone. I hesitated for a moment, then typed a reply. "I will be there. And I am bringing my +1. The response came back almost instantly. A +1. "Do you have a boyfriend? That is wonderful news. The family will be so happy to meet him." I read the message twice. The assumption. The immediate pivot to superficial excitement. She didn't care who it was as long as it fit the picture of a happy, normal family she wanted to project. I didn't reply. I stood up and began to pack the box. The receipts went in first, then the folder with Megan's evidence, then the USB drive. I closed the lid of the Nike box. It clicked shut with a sound finality. No mom, I thought, looking at the invite on my desk. Not a boyfriend. Something much stronger. I turned off the lights. Tomorrow, the house of cards was coming down. The rain in Portland didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. I sat in the idling Camry outside the Marriott downtown watching the water distort the world through the windshield. It was 1 o'clock. The meeting was in an hour. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles had turned the color of old bone. When Megan pushed through the hotel's revolving doors, I almost didn't recognize her. In the coffee shop, she had been a tragedy. Today, she looked like a reckoning. She wore a simple navy blue dress that draped over her 7-month bump, and her hair was pulled back in a severe, tight ponytail. She clutched a thick plastic folder to her chest like a shield. I unlocked the doors, and she slid into the passenger seat, bringing the smell of rain and expensive hotel soap with her. "Ready?" I asked. She exhaled a long, shaky sound. "No, but let's go anyway." I pulled out into traffic, merging onto the highway that would take us south toward Lake Oswego. The silence in the car was thick, filled with the things we were about to destroy. Megan opened the folder on her lap. I glanced over and saw the stack of papers inside. Text messages, bank transfers, emails, photographs. Every lie my brother had told her was printed there in black and white, organized by date. "I didn't sleep last night," Megan said, her voice barely louder than the hum of the heater. I kept playing it out in my head. What if he is there? What if he looks at me? "He will be there," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "And he will look at you. But he won't see you. Kyle only sees people as ATMs or mirrors." Megan ran a hand over the cover of the folder. "I want to hurt him, Beth. I know that sounds terrible. I am a teacher. I tell kids to use their words. But I want to hurt him the way he hurt me." "You will," I said. "The truth is, the only weapon that leaves a scar on a narcissist." We crossed the county line into Lake Oswego. The houses got bigger, the lawns greener, the fences higher. This was a world of manicured perfection where problems were whispered about behind heavy oak doors and solved with checks that cleared quietly. I turned onto Oakwood Drive. My parents' house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, a sprawling 2-story colonial with white pillars and a driveway that could fit 6 cars. It was full. My aunt's Lexus was there, Uncle Frank's massive pickup truck, my cousin's sedan, and right in the prime spot parked diagonally so no one else could squeeze in was a black Mercedes S-Class. I parked my 15-year-old Toyota on the street half a block away. "That is his car?" Megan asked, staring at the shiny black metal. "It is a rental," I said. "He probably leased it yesterday to look successful for the meeting. He would spend his last $100 on a car payment before he bought groceries." We walked up the driveway in the drizzle. I could feel Megan trembling beside me, a fine vibration that traveled through her arm where it brushed against mine. I reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "You do not have to say a word until you are ready," I told her. "Just stand there. Your presence is enough." I rang the doorbell. The chime echoed inside the same 2-note melody that had signaled the end of my freedom every day after school for 18 years. Mom opened the door. Denise Hartman was wearing her hosting armor, a stiff beige cardigan pearls, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked at me, her expression a mix of relief and annoyance, and then her gaze slid to Megan. The smile faltered. Her eyes dropped to Megan's stomach, then snapped back up, confusion wrinkling her forehead. "Beth," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You did not say you were bringing a friend." I pulled the invitation out of my pocket and tapped the handwritten note on the back. "You said I could bring a +1 mom. Right here. It can be hard to attend these things alone." Denise flushed, a splotch of red appearing on her neck. I assumed you would bring a boyfriend. Or maybe Jenna. I didn't know you had a pregnant friend." "This is Megan," I said, stepping past her into the foyer. "She is not just a friend. She is relevant to the discussion." "Relevant," Mom hissed, closing the door quickly to keep the neighbors from seeing anything unusual. "How could a stranger be relevant to your brother's financial crisis?" I didn't answer. I just walked toward the living room. The house smelled the way it always did, lemon polish and old dust. The living room was arranged like a stage set. My father Roy sat in his leather armchair looking grim and authoritative. Aunt Helen, Uncle Frank, and 3 cousins were scattered around the room on the floral sofas holding cups of coffee and looking uncomfortable. And there, in the center of the room, sitting on the ottoman with his elbows on his knees, was Kyle. He looked good. I had to give him that. He was 42 but looked 35 with the kind of rugged, handsome face that made people want to trust him. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly food budget, and his expression was a perfect mask of humble contrition. He looked up as we entered. He saw me first, and gave a small, sad nod. Then he saw Megan. The reaction was instantaneous. The blood drained from his face so fast it looked like a light switch had been flipped. His mouth opened, then closed. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw the sheer, unadulterated panic underneath. He looked like a trapped animal. But Kyle was a professional. Before anyone else could notice, he blinked, looked away, and furrowed his brow as if trying to place a vaguely familiar face. "Everyone take a seat," Dad boomed from his chair. "We have a lot to get through." There were no empty chairs left, so Megan and I stood near the fireplace. The room was silent, heavy with the weight of unsaid things. Dad cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. We are here today because, as you know, the family is facing some challenges. Kyle has been navigating a very difficult economic climate." I almost laughed. Economic climate. Dad made it sound like Kyle was a Lehman Brothers executive, not a guy who played online poker until 4 in the morning. Dad continued, his voice taking on the cadence of a sermon. "We all know how hard Kyle has worked. Startups are risky, but he has hit a stumbling block, a liquidity issue, and when one of us stumbles, the rest of us are there to catch him. That is what Hartmans do." Mom jumped in, her voice smooth and soothing. "Kyle feels terrible about asking. He has been so stressed he has lost weight, but he has a plan to get back on track. He just needs a bridge, a fresh start." She turned her eyes to me. The pressure in the room shifted, focusing entirely on where I stood. "Beth," Dad said, softening his tone, "we know you have done a lot in the past. We appreciate it. But looking at the assets available, you have the house in Portland. It is sitting there fully paid off." I felt Megan stiffen beside me. "We were wondering," Dad said, "if you would consider signing the deed over to Kyle, just temporarily, so he can use the equity as collateral for a new business loan. He will pay you back with interest within the year." The room was so quiet I could hear the rain hitting the window pane. Kyle finally spoke. He looked up at me, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. It was a masterclass in manipulation. "Beth," he said, his voice cracking just the right amount, "I know I haven't been the best brother lately. I have been so focused on work, I drifted away. And I am sorry." He stood up and took a step toward me, hands open, palms up. "I am humiliated to be in this position. Truly. But this new venture, it is a sure thing. I just need a chance. One chance to prove to you, to Mom and Dad, that I can make this right. You are the only one who can save me, Beth." From the corner, Aunt Helen sniffled. "Oh, Kyle, we know your heart is in the right place." "Beth, honey," Mom said, "look at your brother. He is asking for your help. He is family." I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the cashmere sweater. I saw the manicured fingernails. I saw the man who had drained my bank account for a decade and was now standing there asking for the roof over my head. "Kyle," I said, my voice calm and loud in the silent room, "you say you are recovering." Recovering from what exactly? Kyle blinked, caught off guard by the direct question. From the market crash. The tech sector took a huge hit last quarter. My investments were leveraged. "Stop," I said. The word was like a gunshot. Dad frowned. Beth let him finish. "No," I said. "I want to hear the truth. For the first time in 40 years, I want to hear one true thing in this house. Tell them what you are actually recovering from." Kyle's smile faltered. A flash of anger crossed his eyes, there and gone. "Beth, you are being dramatic. This is a family meeting, not a trial." I turned to the room. "My brother says he needs a bridge. He says he needs a fresh start. But before I make any decisions about my house, I think there is someone you all should meet." I stepped aside and gestured to Megan. "This is Megan Porter," I said. "She drove 3 hours from Seattle to be here today." Mom looked from me to Megan, her face pinched. Is she a lawyer? Did you bring a lawyer? Beth? No, I said. She is a second-grade teacher, and she has a very interesting connection to the family. I turned to Kyle. Kyle, why don't you introduce your girlfriend to our parents? The air left the room. Kyle let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. Girlfriend Beth, I have never seen this woman before in my life. Megan flinched as if he had slapped her. You don't know her? I asked. No, Kyle said, shaking his head, looking around the room for support. I mean, maybe I met her at a networking event. I meet thousands of people, but I certainly don't know her. I reached into Megan's folder and pulled out a photograph. It was the one from Cabo. Kyle and Megan's sunset arms wrapped around each other. I held it up so Dad could see it. That is funny, I said, because you look pretty familiar with her in this photo, taken 8 months ago, in Cabo, when you told Mom you were at a meditation retreat. Dad leaned forward, squinting at the photo. Kyle's face turned a mottled shade of gray. Okay, fine. So I dated her for a few weeks. It was a fling. It meant nothing. I didn't want to upset Mom by mentioning it. A fling? Megan whispered. Her voice was shaking, but it carried. She stepped forward. She looked small next to the fireplace, but there was a fire in her eyes that made her seem 10 feet tall. We were together for 2 years, Kyle, she said. 2 years. You asked me to marry you. The room erupted. Mary Mom shrieked. Kyle is not engaged. No, I am not. Kyle shouted, his calm facade shattering. She is crazy. She is a stalker. Megan reached into her folder again. She pulled out a stack of papers an inch thick. A stalker, she asked, her voice gaining strength. A stalker doesn't get 500 text messages from you. She looked down at the paper on top of the stack. Kyle Morrison, she read. That is the name you gave me. You told me you were an orphan. You told me your parents died in a car accident. You cried on my shoulder about growing up alone. Dad stood up slowly, his face turning purple. Kyle Morrison. Orphan. Kyle was backing away now, putting the ottoman between him and Megan. It is a misunderstanding. She is confused. She is mixing me up with someone else. Megan pulled out another sheet. Bank records. And the $85,000 I transferred to you, she asked. Was that a misunderstanding too? The money for the house in Queen Anne. The money you said we needed to start our family. Family. Mom whispered, her hand going to her throat. Megan placed a hand on her stomach. And this, she said, looking straight at Kyle. Your son. Is he a misunderstanding too? Silence crashed down on the room, absolute and suffocating. Kyle opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the photo, looked at the papers, and then looked at his parents. For the first time in his life, the golden boy had nowhere to hide. Kyle stood up. He did not yell. He did not flip the coffee table. He did the opposite, sinking into a posture of relaxed, weary patience that I had seen him use 1,000 times to talk his way out of speeding tickets and lease violations. He smoothed the front of his cashmere sweater and looked around the room, making eye contact with Uncle Frank, then Dad, and finally Aunt Helen. He offered them a small, pitying smile. Okay, he said, his voice dropping to a register that was calm, reasonable, and utterly terrifying. I see what is happening here. He turned to Megan, not with anger, but with a look of profound disappointment. Megan. I told you months ago that we could not see each other anymore. I was clear. I know it is hard to accept rejection, but this, following me to my parents' house, dragging my sister into it. He shook his head. It is too much. You need help. Megan's mouth fell open. You need help. Kyle turned back to the room. I met her at a conference in Seattle. We went out for dinner a few times. That is it. But she started texting, calling, showing up at my hotel. She became obsessed. I had to change my number to get away from her. He said it with such conviction that for a split second even I looked at Megan. That was Kyle's gift. He could sell sand to a desert nomad and make him thank him for the bargain. I saw the doubt creeping into Uncle Frank's eyes. I saw Mom clutch her pearls, nodding slightly, latching onto the lifeline her son had just thrown her. A stalker, Mom breathed. Of course. Megan did not scream. She did not cry. She simply opened the plastic folder in her hands and pulled out the second stack of papers. Obsessed, she repeated, her voice steady. She walked over to the coffee table and dropped the stack in front of my father. These are transcripts of every text message sent between the number I have for Kyle Morrison and my phone. 2 years of them. She picked up the top sheet. March 15th, 2023, she read. Baby, I cannot stop thinking about our future together. You are the only good thing in my life. She flipped the page. July 4th, 2023. Happy anniversary, my love. 1 year down, forever to go. She looked at Kyle. December 25th, 2023. Merry Christmas, my darling. Next year we will be together, I promise. I hate being alone on the holidays. Kyle's face twitched. Photoshop, he said quickly. Anyone can fake text messages. She is disturbed. She probably typed those up herself last night. And the bank transfers, I asked. I stepped forward and placed my own stack of papers next to Megan's. I had highlighted the dates in yellow. 5 transfers, I said, totaling $85,000, from Megan Porter to Kyle Hartman, not Kyle Morrison. The routing number goes directly to the Chase account at the branch on Hawthorne, the same account I have deposited money into for a decade. Dad picked up the bank statements. His hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. He looked at the routing number. He looked at the name. Kyle. Dad said, his voice sounding thin and old. What is this? Kyle ran a hand through his hair, laughing nervously. Dad, come on. It was a business arrangement. She wanted to invest. I told her it was high risk. She pushed the money on me. Invest in what Megan asked. In the future, Kyle snapped, his facade cracking just enough to show the teeth beneath. In the vision. You said you believed in me. You said it was for a house. Megan shouted, her composure finally breaking. You said it was for a nursery business capital, Kyle said, waving his hand dismissively. You misunderstood. You hear what you want to hear. Aunt Helen cleared her throat from the corner. It does seem possible there was a misunderstanding, she said weakly. Young people complicate things. Maybe we should not jump to conclusions. I turned on her. The orchid she had brought to my bakery yesterday felt like a joke now. A misunderstanding, Helen. Like the $50,000 you co-signed for 3 years ago? Helen froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue melting in the heat. I pulled out the court record Jenna had sent me and slapped it onto the table. Civil judgment, I said. Defaulted. Kyle took $50,000 from his own aunt, stopped paying, and let the creditors come after her retirement fund. Did he tell you that was for a vision too, Helen? Or did he tell you he needed it for surgery or to save a puppy? Kyle whirled on me. You checked my background. You investigated your own family. I looked him dead in the eye. I investigated a predator. The room went silent. The air was sucked out of the space, leaving a vacuum where only the truth existed. The cousins were staring at their shoes. Uncle Frank was looking at Helen with dawning horror. Megan took a step toward Kyle. She placed both hands on her stomach, framing the life he had created and abandoned. I do not want the money, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. I know I will never see that $85,000 again. I made peace with that on the drive down here. That money was my parents' legacy, the people you claimed to be just like. Orphans. You used my grief to get into my wallet. Kyle looked away, focusing on a spot on the carpet. I came here for one reason, Megan continued. Look at me, Kyle. He refused. Look at me, she screamed. Kyle's head snapped up. Tell your parents why you left, Megan said, tears streaming down her face now. Tell them why you disappeared 4 weeks after I sent you the ultrasound. Tell them why a man who wanted to build an empire suddenly could not answer a phone call when he found out he was going to be a father. Dad looked at his son. Kyle, Dad said. Is this true? Is that your child? Kyle opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the door, calculating the distance. It is complicated, Dad, he muttered. I wasn't ready. She trapped me. She went off birth control without telling me. So you admit it? I said. You admit you knew. "It is not what you think," Kyle shouted. "It is exactly what we think," I said. "You lied to me for 10 years to get a house. You lied to her for 2 years to get her inheritance. You lied to everyone in this room." I felt a surge of triumph. It was done. The evidence was on the table. The witnesses were present. The golden boy was tarnished beyond repair. Then Mom stood up. "Enough," she screamed. The sound was primal, a sheer tear in the fabric of the afternoon. Denise Hartman was shaking, her face flushed a deep, alarming red. But she wasn't looking at Kyle. She was looking at me. "How dare you?" she hissed. I blinked. "Mom, you bring this stranger into our home," she said, pointing a trembling finger at Megan. "You ambush your brother. You dig up dirt on your aunt. You humiliate us in front of the whole family. Who do you think you are?" I stared at her. "I am the one telling you the truth." "Truth," she scoffed, stepping over the bank statements scattered on the floor as if they were trash. "This is not truth. This is a vendetta. You have always been jealous of him." My jaw dropped. "Jealous always," she shouted. "Since you were children. You could not stand that he had big dreams. You could not stand that he took risks while you stayed safe in your little bakery with your flour and your apron. You want to destroy him because he shines and you do not." I looked at Dad. He was staring at his hands, refusing to meet my gaze. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking, "he stole $85,000 from a pregnant woman. He lost the house I paid for. He made mistakes," Mom yelled. "He is under pressure. And this girl," she gestured vaguely at Megan. "Who knows who she is? She could be anyone. She could have targeted him because she knows we have money. She is probably looking for a payout." Megan let out a small, wounded sound. "Wealthy," Megan said. "He told me he was broke. He told me he slept in his car before he met me." "See," Mom said triumphantly. "He was testing you, and clearly you failed." I felt the room tilting. The logic was so twisted, so perverse, that it made me dizzy. Denise Hartman would rather believe her son was a genius playing 4D chess than admit he was a thief. She would rather believe I was a vindictive monster than accept that her golden child was flawed. "This is sickness," I said quietly. "This family is sick." "If we are so sick, then leave," Mom said. "Get out, and take your friend with you." Kyle saw the opening. He saw the way the tide was turning, how Mom's denial offered him a life raft. He stood up straighter. He adjusted his cuffs. The charm flickered back on, weak but functional. "Mom is right," he said softly. "This has gotten out of hand. Beth, you are obviously emotional. Megan, look, I am sorry if signals were crossed." He turned to the room, offering a weary, apologetic smile. "We are a family," he said. "Families fight. But we should handle this privately. We don't need to air our laundry like this." He walked toward Megan, stopping just outside of arm's reach. His voice dropped to that intimate, persuasive timbre I knew so well. "Megan," he said. I panicked. Okay, I was scared. The business was failing and the baby, it was too much. But I am here now. Maybe we can go into the other room. Just you and me. We can talk about this. We can figure something out for the baby. I saw Megan hesitate. It was slight, but it was there. She was terrified, broke, and pregnant. And here was the father of her child finally acknowledging her, finally offering a sliver of the hope she had clung to for months. The biological imperative to find safety, to find a father for her child, was warring with her brain. Kyle saw it too. He took a step closer. "I want to do the right thing, Megan, but not like this. Not with everyone shouting." Frank nodded. "That sounds reasonable," he muttered. "Let them talk." Mom sat back down, smoothing her skirt. "See, he is taking responsibility." I looked at them. I looked at my parents, relieved to be back in their denial. I looked at my aunt and uncle, desperate to avoid conflict. I looked at Megan, whose resolve was crumbling under the weight of her fear. If I let this happen, Kyle would win. He would take Megan into the kitchen, spin her a new web of lies, promise her a payment plan he would never honor, and send her back to Seattle with false hope. And tomorrow, he would be back to asking for my house. I looked at the shoebox of receipts I had left in the car. I thought about the recording in my pocket. I realized then that I had been holding back. Even now, even after everything, I had been trying to spare them the worst of it. I had been trying to use the scalpel when the situation required a sledgehammer. "Okay," I said loud enough to cut through Kyle's murmuring. I walked to the center of the room, standing between Kyle and Megan. "I will go. But before I do, there is one last thing." Kyle sighed. "Beth, please, don't you think you have done enough damage?" "Not yet," I said. I looked at my father. "Dad, do you remember the day we signed the papers for the house on Maple Street?" Dad looked up wary. "That was 10 years ago, Beth. I remember it perfectly," I said. "I remember sitting in the kitchen. I remember you telling me that Kyle couldn't be on the deed because of his credit score. I remember you asking me to make the payments because you were strapped." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB drive. "And I remember what you promised me." I walked over to the expensive sound system Kyle had bought them for Christmas 2 years ago, using I now realized money he had likely stolen from someone else. I plugged the drive into the port. "What are you doing?" Mom asked, rising from her chair. "I am playing the truth, Mom, since you seem to have trouble recognizing it." I pressed play. The speakers crackled. A moment of static filled the living room, loud and harsh, making Aunt Helen jump. Then a voice cut through the silence. It was younger, stronger, devoid of the tremor that shook my father's hands today, but it was unmistakably Roy Hartman. "Listen, Pumpkin, I know it is a big ask, but if you pay the mortgage directly, we keep the bank off our backs. As soon as Kyle gets this distribution deal sorted, we transfer the deed to you. Every cent you put in is equity. The house is yours, I promise." I pulled the drive out. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before. Dad sat frozen in his leather armchair. He was staring at the sleek black speakers as if they had just spoken in tongues. His mouth hung slightly open, a slackness to his jaw that made him look suddenly frail. "That was 10 years ago," I said into the quiet. October 14th. I bent down to my large tote bag and pulled out the Nike shoebox. It was battered, the corners taped over the cardboard soft from years of handling. I walked to the coffee table right where Kyle had been resting his feet moments ago and took off the lid. "Oh, you want to talk about investment?" I asked. I turned the box over. 120 receipts cascaded onto the polished wood table. They slid over the glossy magazines and the ceramic coasters, a paper landslide of debt. Some were faded thermal paper curling at the edges. Others were crisp printouts from the bank. $336,000, I said. I picked up a handful and let them flutter back down. That is 10 years of my life. That is the car I did not buy, the vacations I did not take, the retirement fund I did not start because I was paying for the roof over Kyle's head. "Dad," I said, turning to him, "you looked me in the eye and told me it was my equity. And 6 months ago, you let Kyle gamble it away." Kyle stood up. The movement was jerky, violent. The mask of the repentant son had dissolved, replaced by something ugly and desperate. His face was flushed, blotchy patches of red spreading up his neck. "Stop it!" he shouted. "Just stop it!" He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Look at you," he spat. "Look at you, Beth. You are pathetic. You kept receipts. Who does that? You kept receipts for 10 years because you knew you would need them to hurt me. I kept them because I am an accountant, Kyle. I kept them because I trusted Dad, but I knew you. You have always hated me," he sneered, stepping closer. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. Always the jealous little sister, standing in the corner, covered in flour, judging everyone. "You are a loser, Beth. You bake bread for a living while I try to build something real. You are lonely and bitter, and you want to drag me down to your level because you cannot stand that I actually have a life." I didn't flinch. I let his words hit me, feeling their heat but not their burn. "And you!" He wheeled around to face Megan. Megan took a step back, her hand flying to her throat. "You think I don't know what this is?" Kyle yelled, his voice cracking. "You are a gold digger. You saw a guy with a nice suit and a big vision and you thought you hit the jackpot. You begged me to take that money. You practically forced it into my hand so you could attach yourself to me." "That is a lie," Megan whispered. "Is it?" Kyle laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "And that baby? Who knows whose it is? You were sleeping around. I know you were. You probably pinned it on me because you thought my family had money. Well, joke is on you, sweetheart. Kyle. Dad shouted, finding his voice at last. That is enough. But Kyle couldn't stop. The dam had broken. The shame was too great to hold, so he was converting it into rage, spewing it out to contaminate everyone else so he wouldn't have to drown in it alone. She is a fraud. Kyle screamed, veins bulging in his neck. They are both frauds. Beth is just trying to buy love because no one gives it to her for free. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I didn't see a monster. I saw a terrified small man who had never been told no in his entire life. You just proved my point, Kyle, I said softly. He stopped breathing hard. What I said, you just proved my point. You will destroy anyone to protect yourself. Your sister, the mother of your child. It does not matter, as long as Kyle wins. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the legal filing Jenna had prepared. This is a constructive trust claim, I said, laying it on top of the pile of receipts. It is a lawsuit, based on oral contract and detrimental reliance. With the recording and these receipts, my lawyer says a judge will likely grant me a lien on any future assets you or Mom and Dad acquire until I am repaid. Mom gasped. You would sue this family. I am not suing the family, Mom. I am recovering stolen property. Kyle looked at the document, then at me. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for an ally. He found neither. The cousins were studying the ceiling. Uncle Frank was staring at his boots. Then Megan stepped forward. She wiped the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. Her movement was slow, heavy, filled with a sudden terrifying calm. You called me a gold digger, she said. You said the baby isn't yours. She pulled her phone from her pocket. I have one more thing for the family to hear. She tapped the screen. The room went dead silent. And then Kyle's voice filled the air again. But this wasn't the screaming, angry Kyle standing in front of us. This was the soft, warm, charming Kyle. The Kyle who made you feel like the only person in the world. Baby. Oh my God, are you serious? A baby? Kyle flinched as if he had been struck. I am going to be a dad. This is the best news ever. Megan. I love you so much. On the recording there was the sound of movement, a rustle of sheets. We are going to be a family. A real family. Not like my fucked up one. We are going to do it right. I promise. I will move to Seattle next month. I will pack everything. Just you, me, and our little miracle. The message ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that marks the end of an era. Dad looked at Kyle. His face was gray, the color of wet ash. Your fucked up family, Dad whispered. Kyle stood there, his mouth opening and closing. He looked at the recording. He looked at Megan's belly. He looked at the horrified faces of his aunt and uncle. The narrative he had constructed for 40 years, the victim, the entrepreneur, the good son, had shattered. There were no pieces left big enough to hide behind. I didn't mean... He looked at Mom. Even she couldn't meet his eyes. She was staring at the pile of receipts on the table, her hand covering her mouth. I need air, Kyle choked out. He turned and bolted. He shoved past Uncle Frank, knocking a coffee cup off the end table. It shattered on the hardwood floor, dark liquid splashing against the white baseboards. We heard the front door slam, shaking the frame of the house. Seconds later, the roar of the rented Mercedes engine faded down the street. He ran, just like he always did. Slowly the room began to empty. Aunt Helen stood up, clutching her purse to her chest. She looked at me, then at the document on the table about her defaulted loan. She didn't say a word. She just walked out. Uncle Frank followed her, muttering something about needing to check on the truck. The cousins vanished like smoke. In 2 minutes, it was just the four of us. Miss Megan, Mom, Dad. The coffee stain on the floor was spreading, seeping into the cracks of the wood. Dad sat with his head in his hands. Mom was standing by the window, staring out at the empty driveway where her son's car had been. She stood rigid, her back to us, her spine stiff as a rod. Dad? I asked softly. He didn't look up. He just shook his head, a slow, rhythmic motion of defeat. Then Mom turned around. Her face was dry. Her eyes were cold, harder than flint. She looked at the receipts scattered on the table, the evidence of my sacrifice. Then she looked at Megan. And finally, she looked at me. I braced myself. I expected tears. I expected her to finally crumble to admit that she had been wrong, that she had backed the wrong horse for 4 decades. "You happy now?" she asked. The voice was low, venomous. "Mom." "You came here to do this," she said, walking slowly toward me. "You planned it. You gathered your little evidence. You brought this stranger. You recorded your own father. Mom, I brought the truth. Kyle lied to you. He stole from you. He is gone," she screamed, the control finally snapping. "My son is gone. You drove him away. Are you happy, Beth? Do you feel big now? Do you feel important?" I stared at her, stunned. The wiring in her brain had short-circuited. She couldn't process the betrayal of her golden child, so she was redirecting the voltage onto the scapegoat. It was easier to hate me for exposing the cancer than to hate the cancer itself. "He destroyed himself, Mom." I just turned on the lights. "You destroyed this family," she hissed. "You. With your jealousy and your ledger. You think money makes you good? You think buying things makes you superior?" "I paid for his house," I said, my voice trembling. "I paid for his mistakes. I have been cleaning up his messes since I was 10 years old." "And you loved every minute of it," she said. "You loved holding it over him. You loved feeling like the martyr." She stopped inches from my face. I could smell her perfume cloying and floral masking the scent of rot. "Get out," she said. Dad looked up. "Denise." "Shut up, Roy," she snapped without looking at him. She kept her eyes locked on mine. "Get out of my house. Take your receipts. Take your friend. And do not come back." I looked at her. I waited for the hurt to come, for the crushing weight of rejection that had terrified me my whole life. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange, airy lightness, like a tether had been cut. The heavy anchor I had been dragging, the need for her approval, the hope that one day she would see me, dropped away. "Okay," I said. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I walked over to the table and began to gather the receipts. I moved methodically, scooping them back into the Nike box. I picked up the USB drive. I picked up the legal filing. I turned to Megan. "Are you ready?" Megan nodded, her hand still protective over her belly. She looked at my mother with a mixture of pity and horror. I took Megan's arm and guided her toward the door. We walked past the shattered coffee cup, past the stain on the floor. At the threshold, I paused. I turned back one last time. Mom was staring at the wall, her face set in a mask of righteous victimhood. Dad was watching me. His eyes were wet, red-rimmed, and filled with a sorrow so deep it looked like it was drowning him. "Dad," I said. He flinched. "If you want to talk, you know where to find me." He didn't speak. He just watched me go. I closed the front door behind us. The latch clicked, a small final sound. We walked to the car in the rain. The drizzle had turned into a steady pour, washing the streets of Lake Oswego. We got into the Camry, the doors sealing us into a quiet, dry bubble. Megan let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for an hour. She slumped against the seat, resting her head on the window. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for you to lose your family." I started the engine. The heater kicked on, blowing warm air against my cold hands. I looked at the house one last time. The lights were on in the living room, casting a warm glow that looked inviting from the street. It looked like a home. It looked like a place where people loved each other. But I knew what was inside. I put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. "I didn't lose my family, Megan," I said, turning onto the main road. I just finally admitted I never had one. My apartment was dark, the kind of absolute suffocating darkness that only exists after the adrenaline of a disaster finally bleeds out. I had not turned on a single lamp since I walked in the door 3 hours ago. I sat on my couch, still wearing my coat, my keys clutched in my hand like a weapon I had forgotten to put down. My phone lay face down on the coffee table. It had buzzed 4 times. Jenna. Probably checking to see if I was suicidal or just drinking. I was neither. I was hollow. I stared at the street lamp, casting a sickly orange rectangle onto my living room rug. I played the tape of the afternoon over and over in my mind, but not the parts where I won. I didn't think about the receipts or the look on Kyle's face when the recording played. I thought about the silence of my father. I thought about the way my mother looked at me with a hatred so pure it felt intimate. You are not my daughter anymore. For 38 years, I had treated their love like a vending machine. If I just put enough coins in enough obedience, enough money, enough silence, the product would eventually drop. I had spent $336,000 trying to buy a candy bar that was never in the machine to begin with. I stood up. The movement made my joints pop loud in the quiet room. I couldn't stay here. The air felt stale, recycled from a life I didn't recognize anymore. I grabbed my bag and walked back out into the rain. 4 a.m. This was usually my time, the golden hour of the baker when the city was dead and the dough was alive. But today, Sweet Beth's bakery felt different. It didn't feel like a business. It felt like a bunker. I let myself in, locking the door behind me. I didn't turn on the overhead fluorescents. I worked by the glow of the streetlights filtering through the front window and the small pilot light of the ovens. I walked into the kitchen and just stood there. I looked at the mixer, a 60-quart Hobart that I had named Bertha. I looked at the proofing racks. I looked at the schedule on the wall detailing orders for the next month. I had built this. I had signed the lease with shaking hands. I had figured out the payroll taxes. I had negotiated with flour suppliers who thought a woman couldn't handle volume. I had done it all without a safety net, without a family trust, without a cheerleader. And I was still standing. My eyes drifted to the corkboard above the desk in the corner. It was covered in invoices and health inspection certificates, but buried in the corner was a small pink note card. A customer had left it on the counter 2 weeks ago. To the owner, I was having the worst week of my life. My husband left. My dog died. I came in here and bought a lemon tart. It was the first time I smiled in 10 days. Thank you for being you. I touched the card. Thank you for being you. Not for what I paid. Not for who I covered for. Just for existing and doing the thing I was good at. A stranger had given me more validation in 3 sentences than my mother had given me in 4 decades. The tears came then. They didn't start as a sob. They started as a release, a physical loosening of the knot that had been tied under my ribs since I was 10 years old. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold tile floor, knees pulled to my chest, weeping into the silence of the kitchen. I cried for the house on Maple Street. I cried for the money. But mostly I cried for the little girl who thought she had to earn the right to take up space. I stayed there until the gray light of dawn began to bleed through the high windows. The back door chimed. I wiped my face with my sleeve, instantly alert. Only 2 people had keys, Jenna and my head baker Marco. But Marco didn't come in until 6. The door opened and Megan walked in. She looked wrecked. Her eyes were swollen, her hair a tangled mess, and she was wearing the same navy dress from yesterday, wrinkled now. She hesitated in the doorway, spotting me on the floor. Jenna gave me the spare key, she said, her voice raspy. She said you would be here. She said you go here when you are hurting. I stood up, my legs stiff. You should be sleeping, Megan. You are pregnant. Stress is bad for the baby. I could not be alone in that hotel room, she said. I kept hearing your mother's voice. Get out. She walked further into the kitchen, looking around at the stainless steel and the silent ovens. She looked small, lost, but her chin was set in that stubborn line I was starting to recognize. She pulled out a stool and sat down heavily. Beth, she said. I am sorry. Stop, I said. Do not apologize. I am. I dragged you into the mud. You lost your parents because of me. I walked over to the sink and splashed cold water on my face. I grabbed a paper towel and dried off, looking at her. I did not lose them, Megan. You cannot lose something you never had. I realized something last night while I was sitting on this floor. What I spent my whole life trying to pay a ransom for a hostage that was already dead, I said. I thought if I just paid enough, they would release the love they were holding back. But there was no hostage. It was just a scam. The love wasn't being held captive. It just wasn't there. Megan wrapped her arms around her belly. It sounds like a lesson I need to learn, she whispered. I literally paid for Kyle's love. $85,000. And I thought if I was just perfect enough, if I was supportive enough, He would finally choose me. I walked over and leaned against the prep table next to her. "We are quite a pair, aren't we?" I said, a dry smile touching my lips. Two smart, capable women brought to our knees by the same mediocre man because we thought we needed permission to be happy. Megan looked up at me. A faint smile mirrored mine. Or she said, two women who finally stopped buying the lie. I looked at the clock. 5:30. The sun was fully up now, painting the kitchen in soft, dusty light. "Have you eaten?" I asked. She shook her head. I grabbed an apron from the hook and tossed it to her. "Put this on." "What are we doing?" I walked over to the walk-in fridge and pulled out a tray of cold dough. "We are making croissants," I said. "Because in this kitchen, when you put in the work, you actually get a result. And because my niece needs butter. My niece." Megan froze as she tied the apron strings. She looked at me, her eyes wide and wet. "Your niece?" I turned on the oven. The fan whirred to life, a steady, comforting hum. "I meant what I said yesterday. Family is who shows up. You showed up." Ghee. By 7 o'clock, the bakery smelled like heaven. Butter, yeast, sugar, and heat. We worked in a comfortable silence, rolling, folding, shaping. Megan was a quick study. She had good hands, gentle but firm. Jenna arrived at 7:15 looking like she hadn't slept either. She carried a venti coffee and a grim expression. She walked straight back to the kitchen, took one look at the tray of fresh croissants and grabbed one without asking. She took a bite, closed her eyes, and groaned. "Okay," she said, chewing. "Sustenance acquired. Now the update." She pulled a file folder from her bag and laid it on the flour-dusted table. "I have a friend at the bank branch on Hawthorne. She couldn't give me specifics due to privacy laws, but she gave me a heads up. Kyle was there yesterday morning, before the meeting. I stopped rolling the dough. He withdrew $40,000 from your parents' joint checking account. It was a cashier's check. 40,000, I asked. That account is their emergency fund. It is Dad's heart surgery money." "It is gone," Jenna said. "And judging by the rental car return records, the Mercedes was dropped off at the airport at 6 last night. He is running Beth. He is probably halfway to Mexico or bouncing around Europe by now." Megan went pale. "So he really isn't coming back, not with 40 grand in his pocket and a fraud allegations hanging over his head," Jenna said. My phone rang. It was sitting on the stainless steel table, vibrating against the metal. The screen flashed a name I didn't expect to see. Dad. I stared at it. The bakery went silent, save for the hum of the oven. "Answer it," Jenna said softly. I picked it up. My hand was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Hello, Beth." His voice sounded terrible. Rough, like he had been swallowing gravel. It sounded like the voice of an old man who had woken up in a house that was suddenly too big and too quiet. "Beth, are you at the shop?" "Yes, Dad. I need to see you. I need to talk. Can I come down?" I looked at Megan. She gave me a small nod. I looked at Jenna, who crossed her arms and stood guard. "Okay," I said. "I am here." He arrived 20 minutes later. He wasn't wearing his suit. He was wearing a raincoat over a wrinkled button-down shirt, and he hadn't shaved. He looked smaller than I remembered, as if the air had been let out of him. He walked into the bakery, the bell jingling cheerfully above his head, a cruel contrast to his face. He saw me. He saw Megan. He saw Jenna. He stopped holding his hat in his hands, dripping rainwater onto the floor I had just mopped. I didn't offer him coffee. I just waited. I didn't sleep. He said, his voice breaking. I sat in that chair all night. Denise went to bed, but I couldn't. He looked at Megan, then quickly looked away, shame coloring his cheeks. I kept hearing it, he whispered. The recording, over and over. The part about the money, I asked. No. The part where he called us his fucked up family. Dad let out a shuddering breath. We gave him everything, Beth. Everything. We remortgaged the house 3 times. We emptied the retirement accounts. We ignored so much. What did you ignore, Dad? I asked. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. I knew about the gambling. The confession hung in the air, heavy and toxic. I knew 5 years ago, he continued. I found the slips. I paid off a bookie who came to the house. I didn't tell your mother. I didn't tell you. I thought if I just covered it, he would stop. I thought I could fix him. You cannot fix a person by hiding their sins, Dad, I said. You just help them get better at hiding. I know he wept. I know that now. But last night, when I heard him say that, after everything we sacrificed, and then to see that poor girl, he gestured to Megan. He is a monster, Beth, and we made him. He reached into his raincoat pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He placed it on the counter. I found this in his desk in the guest room. I was looking for... I don't know what I was looking for. Answers. I picked up the paper. It was a loan document from a private lender. High interest, predatory, $80,000, taken out 2 years ago. I scanned to the bottom. There were 2 signatures, Kyle Hartman and Roy Hartman. But as I looked closer, I saw the tremor in the ink of my father's name. The loop of the R was too wide. The slant was wrong. Dad? I asked, looking up. I never signed that, he whispered. Jenna stepped forward, snatching the paper from my hand. She scanned it like a laser. This is a home equity line of credit, she said. Secured against your house. Dad, if he defaulted on this. He did, Dad said. The foreclosure notice was under the papers. That is why he lost the house on Maple Street. But this is on our house. The house on Oakwood. He forged your signature, I said. My voice was flat. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Kyle hadn't just used emotional manipulation. He had committed a felony against his own father. That is first-degree forgery and aggravated identity theft, Jenna said, her lawyer voice cutting through the emotion. That is prison time, Roy. Real prison time, not a slap on the wrist. Dad nodded. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face into the gray stubble on his chin. I do not know what to do, Beth. Your mother. She refuses to believe it. She says it is a mistake. She says we have to protect him. But if I protect him on this, we lose the house. We lose everything. I walked around the counter. I stood in front of my father. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking up at him seeking approval. I was looking down at him, offering a lifeline. You have a choice, Dad. A binary choice. There is no middle ground anymore. I pointed at the document. Kyle withdrew $40,000 from your joint account yesterday and fled the state. He left you with this debt. He left you with a forged signature. I took a breath. You can continue to be his victim. You can let him burn your house down to keep him warm. Or you can finally act like a father. What do I do? He asked, his voice sounding like a child's. I looked at Jenna. Jenna pulled out her phone. You file a police report, Roy. Right now. You report the forgery. You report the theft of the $40,000. Once that report is filed, we can freeze the accounts. We can contest the debt. But you have to be willing to press charges. You have to be willing to send your son to prison. Dad looked at the loan document. He looked at Megan's pregnant belly. He looked at me. I saw the war in his eyes, the 40 years of conditioning fighting against the cold, hard reality of survival. Then he took a deep breath. He straightened his spine just a little. He called us fucked up, he muttered, after I saved him from the bookie. He looked at me. Call them, Beth. Call the police. I will tell them everything. I nodded to Jenna. She hit dial. As she spoke to the dispatcher, Dad reached out and took my hand. His grip was weak, his palm clammy, but he held on. I'm sorry, he whispered. I am so sorry I didn't protect you. I squeezed his hand back. I didn't say I forgive you. I wasn't there yet. Maybe I never would be. But I said the truth. It is a start, Dad. It is a start. The officer who took Dad's statement was young with a buzz cut and a notepad that looked too small for the magnitude of the crime. He stood at the counter of my bakery drinking the coffee I had poured him, listening as my father dismantled his own son's life sentence by sentence. I watched Dad sign the affidavit. His hand shook so violently that the pen skidded across the paper, turning his signature into a jagged EKG line of heartbreak. But he finished it. He put the dot after his name, set the pen down, and looked at me. He looked 10 years older than he had yesterday, his skin gray and papery, but his eyes were clear. It is done, he whispered. Jenna was already on the phone with the district attorney's office discussing freezing assets and flight risks. Megan sat on a stool in the corner, her hands resting on her belly, watching us with a kind of sad reverence. We were a strange war council, a baker, a lawyer, a pregnant teacher, and a broken father united by the wreckage one man had left behind. We did not have to wait long for the aftershock. It arrived 40 minutes later in the form of my mother. I heard her car before I saw her. Tires screeched into the parking lot, followed by the slam of a heavy door. The bell above the bakery entrance didn't just jingle, it screamed as she threw the door open. Denise Hartman marched into my shop like she was invading a hostile country. She was wearing her raincoat, but she hadn't buttoned it, and her hair was wild damp from the morning drizzle. She ignored the few customers buying muffins. She ignored Jenna. She ignored Megan. She walked straight to Dad. "You did it," she hissed. Her voice was a low, vibrating chord of fury. "I just got a call from the bank. The accounts are frozen. They said there is a police report." Dad looked at her. He didn't stand up. He didn't shrink away. He just sat there on the stool holding his cold cup of coffee. "I filed it, Denise. You filed charges against your son," she screamed. The veneer of the Lake Oswego matriarch cracked and fell away, leaving something raw and ugly underneath. "You turned him in. He is scared, Roy. He is running because he is scared. And you sent the wolves after him. He stole $40,000 yesterday," Dad said quietly. "He forged my signature on an $80,000 loan. He stole my identity. He borrowed it," she yelled, slamming her hand on the display case. The glass rattled. He was going to pay it back. "He always pays it back." "No, Mom," I said, stepping out from behind the counter. "He doesn't. I paid it back. For 10 years. She whirled on me. "This is your fault," she spat. "You poisoned your father." You whispered in his ear. "You could not stand that we loved Kyle, so you had to turn him into a criminal." I stood my ground. I didn't cross my arms. I didn't look down. I looked her right in the eye, seeing the panic behind the rage. She was terrifying, yes. But she was also pathetic. A woman fighting to protect a delusion because the truth would require her to admit she had been a bad mother to the child who actually mattered. I didn't turn anyone, Mom. I just stopped covering for him. And so did Dad. Denise stared at me, her chest heaving. She looked around the bakery at the life I had built without her help, at the friends who stood by me, at the father who had finally chosen me. She saw that she had no power here. Her guilt, Tripp's her silent treatments, her emotional blackmail, they were currency that had no value in this economy. "Fine," she said, her voice turning icy and brittle. "If you proceed with this, if you let them arrest him, you are dead to me. Both of you." She looked at Dad. "Do not come home, Roy. If you sign that paper, you do not have a home." Dad looked at the affidavit on the counter. He looked at the woman he had been married to for 45 years, the woman who had enabled every bad instinct their son ever had. "I already signed it, Denise." She gasped a sound like a balloon popping. She looked at him with absolute shock, as if the furniture had suddenly started speaking. "Then you have nothing," she said. She turned and walked out. She didn't look back. The door swung shut, the bell jingling cheerfully, sealing the silence she left behind. Dad slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. It was the first time I had touched him in years without feeling like I was bracing for impact. "You have a home, Dad," I said. "You can stay with me." Chess. Spring came to Portland in a wash of cherry blossoms and rain. The days grew longer. The light in the bakery shifted from gray to gold, and the legal machinery ground forward with slow, indifferent precision. It wasn't like the movies. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown where Kyle broke down and confessed his sins while the jury gasped. It was a series of meetings in beige conference rooms, endless paperwork, and plea bargains negotiated over speakerphone. Kyle had been arrested in a motel outside of Sacramento 3 days after the meeting. He had maxed out the credit cards and was trying to buy a fake ID. 2 months late, on a Tuesday afternoon, I sat in Jenna's office with Dad and Megan to hear the end of it. "He took the deal," Jenna said, sliding a document across the mahogany desk. "Pleading guilty to 1 count of first-degree forgery and 1 count of identity theft. The fraud charges regarding Megan were dropped as part of the bargain, but the restitution order stands." And the sentence Dad asked. He was living in my guest room now, looking healthier than I had seen him in years. He had lost weight, but the haunted look was gone. 2 years, Jenna said. But with the overcrowding and his lack of priors, he will likely serve 6 months in minimum security and the rest on probation. 6 months. It didn't seem like enough for a lifetime of destruction. But Jenna continued, pointing to a clause on page 4. Here is the part that matters. The restitution order is permanent. He owes Megan $85,000. He owes Roy $80,000. He owes the bank $40,000. That debt is non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. It will follow him until the day he dies. Any paycheck, any tax refund, any inheritance, it gets garnished. I looked at Megan. She was huge now, 9 months pregnant and ready to pop. She rested her hand on the paper. He will never pay it, she said softly. No, Jenna agreed. He probably won't. But he can never pretend he is a success again. His credit is torched. His background check is flagged. The mask is gone, Megan. He has to live as exactly who he is. And Mom? I asked. She is selling the house in Lake Oswego. Dad said, his voice steady. She is moving to Arizona to be near her sister. She blames the liberal prosecutors. She blames us. She still sends Kyle money to his commissary account. I nodded. It was a tragedy, but it was her tragedy. I didn't have to carry it anymore. My settlement was smaller. Dad had insisted on cashing out a portion of his own 401k to pay me back part of what I had spent on the Maple Street mortgage. It was $150,000. Less than half of what I had lost, but Dad had looked me in the eye when he gave me the check and said, "It is all I have right now, but I will spend the rest of my life making up the difference." I took the check not because I needed the money, but because he needed to give it. It was his penance. I walked out of the office into the sunshine. The air smelled of wet asphalt and blooming dogwood. I felt lighter, not triumphant, just unburdened. The heavy coat I had been wearing for 38 years was finally in the trash. My phone buzzed, a text from Dad. "I'm going to look at that apartment in the Pearl District. Want to get dinner later," I typed back. "Tacos, my treat." 2 weeks later, my phone rang at 3 a.m. It wasn't a crisis call. It was Megan. "It is time," she gasped. I was at the hospital in 20 minutes. Dad met me there, bringing a bag of bagels and a thermos of coffee for the nurses. We paced the waiting room together, the unlikeliest of grandfathers and aunts. When they finally let us in, the room was bathed in soft morning light. Megan looked exhausted, her hair plastered to her forehead, but she was smiling. In her arms was a bundle wrapped in a generic hospital blanket. I walked over to the bed. "She is beautiful," I whispered. "She has his eyes," Megan said, tracing the baby's cheek. It was true. The baby had the Hartman eyes, blue and piercing. But I am going to make sure she sees the world differently than he did. "What is her name?" Dad asked, leaning over the rail. His finger was gently stroking the baby's tiny fist. "Hope," Megan said. She looked at me. "Because that is what you gave me that day in the coffee shop, when I thought I had nothing left." I felt a lump in my throat the size of a fist. I reached out and touched the baby's soft, downy head. "Hope," I repeated. Megan looked up at me. "She is going to need an aunt, you know. Someone to teach her how to bake. Someone to teach her that she does not have to buy love." I smiled and tears finally spilled over. I would be honored. The door opened and a nurse bustled in to check vitals, but the bubble of peace around the bed didn't break. I looked at the three of us. Megan, the mother who survived. Dad, the father who woke up. Me, the daughter who walked away. And Hope, the new beginning. We weren't the family that looked good in a posed photograph. We were messy. We were scarred. We were pieced together with duct tape and forgiveness. But we were real. 6 months later. 5 a.m. The bakery was quiet, the only sound the rhythmic slap of dough against the stainless steel counter. I pressed my weight into the heels of my hands, feeling the elasticity, the life in the mixture. Flour dusted the air like magic dust. The routine was the same as it had been a year ago. The smell of yeast, the hum of the refrigerator, the gray light of dawn outside the window. But everything else had changed. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the office. The shelf where the Nike shoebox used to sit was empty. I had burned the receipts in a bonfire on the beach with Megan and Dad 3 months ago. We had roasted marshmallows over the flames of my past debts. I looked at the wall near the entrance. The old photo of the Hartman family, the one where I stood on the edge looking like an intruder, was gone. In its place hung a new frame. It was a candid shot taken in this very kitchen. Megan was laughing flour on her nose. Dad was holding baby Hope, who was wearing a tiny baker's hat, and I was in the center. I was looking at the camera, and I wasn't smiling to please anyone. I was laughing, head thrown back, eyes bright. I looked like I belonged. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Megan. Hope slept through the night. First time, see you at 10 for croissants. I smiled and typed back, I will have them hot. Bring the baby. I put the phone down and went back to the dough. I shaped it into crescents, my hands moving with muscle memory, but without the desperate need for perfection that used to drive me. I looked out the window. The sun was cresting over the buildings, painting the wet streets of Portland in shades of pink and gold. For 38 years I had thought family was a debt you paid. I thought love was a transaction. I thought if I just gave enough, I would eventually be full. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of sugar and butter and new beginnings. I was finally empty of all that. And because I was empty, I had room to be filled with something real. I wasn't the good daughter anymore. I wasn't the ATM, I wasn't the scapegoat, I was just Beth. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.